I'm Jeffrey Siegel, the host of the Mystic Journey podcast. I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. Today, we look to enlighten and enliven you with a thought-provoking discussion with one of the community's most successful and inspiring individuals. Everyone has a story, a life journey, a mystic journey. Today, our guests will share with you their personal journey, along with some of their secrets and some of the tools they utilize to get where they are today. Sit back and enjoy our conversation and look forward to being uplifted and emboldened with a positive discussion that may just propel you onto a new path or the next step in your own mystic journey. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Mystic Journey podcast. This is Jeffrey Siegel, your host, and I'm once again looking forward to spending some time with you to explore the mystic journey of another amazing individual who I think will uplift you and maybe, hopefully, inspire you to take the next step on your own mystic journey. Well, today I am more than honored to have with us Stephen Halpern. I've known Stephen for many years and just am so thrilled to have him with us. Stephen is really known as one of the founders of New Age music, and we will get into that a lot, and his background and his music and how he views the relationship between music and health and spirituality. Stephen is a Grammy award-winning nominee. He started back with music in the 60s. He's recorded more than 50 albums. His most successful one of these is Deja Blues, which
Bro,
actually
you got an old bio there, bro.
yeah. Well, we'll
I love
get in.
Deja.
We'll get into the update then for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
Steven sold millions and millions of albums, and let me just sort of cut to the chase. I mean, his thing is really bringing music to a different level and having it impact the body, mind, and soul just in a different level. And so, with that, let me say hi, Steven. How are you?
hi Jeffrey. Well, I'm good right now, and ready to answer your questions and share some stuff with our audience.
That's great. Again, I am very grateful and appreciative that you're spending this time with us and with me and with our audience, and I'm sure they will come away inspired and having learned something new. I like to start my conversations with my guests just with a little bit of background about you personally, like where you grew up, how you went to school, and then ultimately how and when you started getting into music, which has really been your path in life.
Absolutely. But before we go any further, let me just clear up that part of the intro.
Sure.
Uh, there's 100 albums that should be there instead of 50 in terms of the bio that you saw, and the most
Wow.
successful albums uh, are are Chakra Suite, which we'll be talking about. And in terms of playlist and sales, and the Grammy nomination was for Deep Alpha, the first brainwave entrainment balancing album to ever get on the Billboard charts, the New Age Billboard charts, and really opened up that field to what's now a very popular area on the internet. Uh, so I wanted to get those out there, and
Thank you.
with the new reality of streaming music where CD sales are not that big anymore, but we can now see almost in real time what people are interested in. What has been so uh, wonderful and acknowledging to me is that the reason I got into this work to create healing and meditation music that resonates and uplifts body, mind, and soul are the albums and the tracks now, the individual songs that are some of the most popular, which is Chakra Suite, Sound Healing 432, which is a collection of like my greatest hits of the genre, and Deep Alpha. So That's what we say. I've been working on, Jeffrey, the uh, a memoir based on the fact that, number one, I'm 75, and I got a lot of stories that I used to always and only share with friends around the campfire, passing
Mhm.
around the peace pipe, and said, "Man, you ought to tell some people about that because no one knows what I did to get here and how it happened, even more so." So I've been working slowly on connecting the dots of my own journey, my own mystic journey. And that's exactly what it has been for me. Looking back, I didn't know at the time that I was being pulled or pushed towards certain things, but I always was following my bliss. When something was interesting to me, I pursued it. When I was growing up in second and third grade, I was, like many kids, reading about dinosaurs. I got
Uh-huh.
into astronomy, but from there, I was also simultaneously reading all the UFO books that were in the library. And I remember
Uh,
the librarian saying, "Little boy, you can't even read these words." And I read everything. And she said, "Well, hot damn." Well, she didn't say that. Okay,
That's
I guess you could borrow these books. So I was like the school authority on planets, astronomy, and UFOs in third and fourth grade. So,
wow.
so I've been into this field for a long time. But and as I went through high school, there was nothing I was really interested in per se. I had no plan for my life. My guidance counselor in high school said, "Well, you're." I don't even remember what she said I was good at, but my friends were going to be doctors or lawyers or dentists. So I thought
Mhm.
that's what my choices were. And dentists, the family dentist we had worked 4 days a week and took long weekends where he went skiing. And I said, "Well, I could play music because in junior high school, and this is really part of the key, I got turned on to jazz improvisation when I went from sixth grade to seventh grade and suddenly was in the band with ninth graders. And some of the guys there were playing music, Jeff, without reading notes. I had never seen such a thing. And
Uh-huh.
the light went on in my head and said, "That is for me. I need to know how to do that." And I went up to them and said, "How do you know what notes to play?" And they said, "Well, you just feel it." And I said, "Well, I don't feel anything. There's got to be." "Well, then you can study with our teachers." And that was when I began to study uh, as a side hustle, jazz improvisation. I got good at it. It was fascinating, but there was no way to make a living. So it was always something I was going to do on weekends or as a background, and had no plans for my life other than to go to college and see what's happening. I was a liberal arts major at the University of Buffalo, but much to my surprise, and it certainly was not a reason I applied there. I was looking at good dental schools and University of California, Berkeley, University of Michigan were coming up as good places. I got into both of them, which of course were two of the leading student radical schools in the 60s. And Buffalo
Mhm.
was the Berkeley, the radical center in the East. And I wound up, that was my safe school. And I went there because my father lost his job, and I had scholarships so I could get to University of Buffalo on scholarship. So I did that and had no idea that in that era, 64 to 66 and 67, many of the
Wow.
leading American, contemporary American poets were in residence there. People like Robert Creeley, Robert Duncan, and our master teacher there, Jack Clark, who was a spiritual master, masquerading as an English professor and
Uh-huh.
William Blake scholar, uh, really had a universe. They called it the curriculum of the soul, and a universe city within the university. And there was a band that Jack was leading one day on a Sunday. The first month I'm up at school, and I would travel everywhere with my trumpet. In its case, because I'm a new guy on campus, and that's part of my identity, being a hotshot trumpet player.
Is that what
This
you
band,
started with the trumpet?
yep, and there was also uh, part of my lifelong attraction for self-generated, legal, non-addictive ways of getting high, or
Okay.
altering my consciousness. On trumpet, uh, I ex- I got accepted to all state jazz band in my junior year, and came back to my senior year knowing how to hit the notes that Maynard Ferguson was hitting up in the stratosphere, notes that don't exist as a trumpet player. But one of the guys at All State Jazz was doing that. And again, I went right up to him and said, "How do you do that? Where did you learn how to do that?" And he said, "Well, my teacher's in New York City, and you could take a bus and a train and go study with him." So I did, and suddenly was the only person around who could hit these stratospheric notes, triple octaves above, or double octaves above the normal range, and that would be such a focus, intention, and physical alignment that I would often shift into some level of altered states of consciousness. Bottom line
What?
is, right?
Go
I
ahead.
get go ahead.
No, go ahead. The bottom line is.
Is I'm attending this little afternoon concert in the faculty lounge, and the leader sees my trumpet case and says, "Is that a trumpet?" I go, "Yeah." He says, "Get up here." So he doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know if I could play, and I I get on with the band, and he points at me when it's my turn to solo, and I start playing the fanciest
Praise the Lord.
scales and riffs and phrases I knew that all musicians will practice. And then at one point, the energy shifted and the trumpet became weightless. It became an extension of my nervous system, and I was playing stuff I never played before. And
Wow.
the last conscious thought I had is, what is happening? And I just went through it. When I finished, my friend said, "When did you get so good?" And what had happened is I had tapped into the zone where I became the music, where the music flows through me, and that was part of what Jack Clark and the others were able to do as like a musical spiritual teacher with satsang and darshan in their playing with them. I jumped octaves of my own experience, and that set me on a path to really explore more about jazz improvisation, but also as we studied in terms of the ancient uh, concept of tuning into one's muse in ancient Greece, in ancient China, in ancient Egypt. I set my intention, if it were possible. I didn't think it was, but hearing about these other people said we get information, we get inspiration from our muse, and I said I want to connect with my muse, and there wasn't a curriculum to do that per se, but that started in 1965 and became uh, something just in the background, but never really dreaming that that would happen. And as things did happen in 1969, we're jumping ahead, I had an experience in meditation in the hills above Santa Cruz, California, where my muse made contact with me, where I had a meditation experience, a life changing meditation, where I started hearing this new music. I had been studying uh, altered states of consciousness as much as you could do in a book. I was studying ethnomusicology and had actually set up a graduate program and a self selected graduate program studying various forms of musical healing and higher consciousness from around the world. And I was looking at taking a field trip to Morocco to hang out with the master musicians of Jajuka, where Brian
Yeah.
Jones had been. And in the summer of '69, I was interviewing William S. Burroughs, and he said, "Well, if you're interested in music and magic, you've got to get to Morocco." So my
Hmm.
life is planned. Okay, I'm going to be in grad school. I'm going to do some field study in Morocco. I'm going to smoke keef with all those master musicians and priests, and we'll see what goes on from there. And then all that changed, but that was when my life really took a major turn. I was supposed to be in grad school in Buffalo. Uh, the band that I was with had a recording session scheduled in New York. We were a hotshot jazz rock band, going to be the next Chicago, a Blood, Sweat, and Tears. We went to New York City, got royally ripped off in the recording session. The band broke apart, and I had 2 weeks of unscheduled time. And I said, I always wanted to visit California. Everybody's saying I should check it out. I hopped on a plane and bought a round trip ticket for 2 weeks, fully expecting to go back to graduate school. I went out with a backpack, my trumpet, and my guitar because I was ready to jam with San Francisco musicians. And my life took some major turns at that point, and that set me on the path for the rest of my life, except that hearing and starting to play this new peaceful music that sounds like most of what we're talking about today. There was no genre for it. There was no new age genre. You couldn't go to a store. You couldn't find an album that was called music for meditation or healing. And there was certainly no place you could buy things at the record stores. Obviously, there were no internet, so there was no place you could really find that sort of thing. And in fact, at that point, as an independent artist, you couldn't even press records, vinyl LP records, because unless you were affiliated and signed to a record label, they owned all the pressing plants.
Yeah.
So it was just something I would play for meditation groups. I'd make individual tapes for people. And Jeff, that was very time consuming. And because I made it for each individual person who asked,
Oh,
they
wow.
said, thank you very much for this gift. So here I am, a starving artist, and people expecting me to give them uh, free tapes when I could barely pay for the price of the tape, let alone my own time to record it, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a process, and to pay the bills, I would teach private students. I did clinics, jazz clinics at the high schools and colleges. Uh, I almost got tenure teaching at some of the local colleges, but because I wasn't black and didn't have a PhD, they said, we'd love to hire you, but the state says we have to have a black PhD on staff, and you're not either.
Yeah.
So I go, okay, that's not going to work. And the other music teachers were jealous because all the students wanted to be in my classes because I was teaching jazz improvisation in a way that no one else was, and they were learning how to get really good really quick. So the other teachers said, get him out of here. So I
Wow.
did not have any idea what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And then Spirit would bring by various people that would guide me or open some doors, and I'd go through them, not knowing what the next door would be. But as things would proceed, as I'm writing my memoir now, every step appears to be orchestrated on some higher level. And some of these accidental connections, and literally some of them were split second synchronicities. Had I showed up a minute later or a minute earlier, I would have missed meeting this person who said, oh, are you the person applying for the job at this human potential center? And I said, no, but if you're asking, sure, I'll take it. I'll audition. And that set up a series of events that was life changing the next couple of hours.
I think when when one is in alignment with their true purpose and in the flow, these I don't believe there are any accidents. These synchronicities happen, and it allows people to know that they're following the path that they should be following. And what I get, Stephen, in listening to you speak, the things that really come through to me are, you weren't afraid. You always took action. You always took that step forward, and you know, subconsciously or consciously, trusted what was happening and that you should be taking these steps. It's so strong to hear these statements of action and moving forward.
I think you're picking up on a very important point. And yet, before that, I would take longer than any of my friends to make a decision on virtually anything. And I'm going, yes, maybe this, but then what about this? And some of these things were split second. And when I basically passed the audition, at this, like we have Esalen Institute, which was the Pioneering Human
Yes,
Potential
I know it.
Center.
Yeah.
Bridgemount Foundation was the second, kind of the smaller sister of Esalen, and they would also be doing weekend retreats and workshops for people. And I had never heard of them. I had heard of Esalen, but had no idea that that's where the people who picked me up when I was hitchhiking from San Francisco to Santa Cruz to visit the William Blake Museum, because Jack Clark, being the country's leading Blake scholar, said at the Blake Museum down there they have the real illuminated manuscripts, not just color or black and white copies of his paintings and engravings, and if you look at them, you'll go into an altered state of consciousness. So to me, everything was, instead of taking acid, you could look at some great art, or you could look at a tanka, some, mystical art from Asia and China and India. So that was my goal, to get to see the exhibit. And the people who picked me up when I was hitching said, "Forget that. We know a place up in the mountains that you should really check out. We'll take you out of our way to go there." Now, if I had
Wow.
been picked up by
No
somebody
one else. Yeah.
right before that, that
Mhm.
connection wouldn't have been made. I would have seen the Blake Museum. I would have been on a plane in 3 days back to Buffalo, and we wouldn't have been having this conversation.
No, no. Again, I mean, this is when you're in alignment with what's supposed to be going on, and so it's interesting. I mean, how would you, to me, when I was. I'm a little bit younger than you. I was, sort of, in the 60s. I was, between, let's say, 5 and 10. But I always,
Aha.
I remember it on TV. I mean, how, to me, the 60s, when I look back or think about it, I mean, it was such a creative, evolving time. How would you describe that period?
Very much the same, and also very hopeful.
Right.
The
Exactly.
I was certainly involved in social justice and anti-war uh, activities, and when it was marching on some of the anti-war marches, and when the physics professor who was standing next to me on one of the lines was beaten by a cop with a billy club, and within an arm's reach of me, I said to myself, this is not the most effective use of my time. I could help the movement much more by doing something else than getting my skull cracked. And literally, I started bands, jam bands, to play at the teach-ins and the rallies between speakers, and that, in addition to what I was studying academically, became part of what I was doing musically. And those musicians and I wound up getting really good. We formed a band, went through personnel changes, and that was where I really got to get serious about being a musician and learning what that meant. And that meant, as one of my teachers, Ron Carter, the legendary bass player, uh, jazz bass player, said, you need to, a real musician practices and studies 8 hours a day. And in the class, it was a black studies class, and I was one of the two white guys allowed to be in there because I was the best trumpet player in town. Uh,
Mhm.
he says, if you're serious, and I said, Mr. Carter, what about college? This is summer school, but he said, fit in your college work around your practice time.
Yeah.
And Jeff, in that time, I went from being a good musician to being so proficient that I could sit in, and I did because I was an Aries and impetuous and uh, well, a risk taker. I would
Hmm.
ask to sit in with bands and have peak experiences. It's like being on a tightrope when you're sitting with people you've never played with before, and sometimes you're playing songs that you know, and sometimes you're just jamming on a couple musical motifs. And that was how I would learn, and really got to a point. But it was not a place of making money. People were not
Yeah.
hiring bands to go into altered states of consciousness. They want to hear songs they know on the radio. They want to hear songs they could dance to. And we learned to play some of those. And I got fired. I was also a guitar player, fired for playing too long a solo in Proud Mary.
Yeah.
When the The
Drinks.
lounge,
Yeah.
the lounge manager said, "People aren't drinking. They're watching you. They're not dancing. They're not sweating. You're fired. We need to get them sweating and dancing." So that was how the universe was telling me this is not your life path. I mean, I knew that, but what am I? How do I supposed to make money? What am I supposed to do with this?
So
And all those things,
when you came to California, so when did your when would you say your focus in music, you know, changed, and how did that move you forward? I mean, because I mean, I've never known you as a trumpet player.
no one knows that, right?
How did that start to evolve?
Well, as I was saying, on this hitchhike to Santa Cruz, the wonderful spiritual hippies in the van took me out of their way. And when I met at the mailbox somebody from Bridge Mountain Foundation who mistook me for a job applicant, he says, "Come back in a couple hours, meet the staff, and you could hang out down the road. There's a little meditation area." So I'm walking down this road, and it's a redwood grove, a clearing with the redwoods in a circle, a cathedral of redwoods around the clearing. And I basically had studied meditation. I was familiar with a kind of an ADHD meditation. I do it for a little bit, and that was that. I
Mhm.
was doing ADHD yoga. I could do all my postures in 5 minutes and thought I was doing yoga.
Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah,
that
like
was that.
many.
Right. But I was basically unexpectedly shifting into a deep meditation, and in that meditation, I heard a voice for one of the only times in my life that, and I started hearing this beautiful music that sounds like what you hear now on Spectrum Suite or Chakra Suite. And it's something I had never heard before, but was instantly familiar. And the voice says, "This is the music that you've been praying to hear. It's more than just cross cultural ethnomusicology. This is the contemporary manifestation of what Edgar Casey was talking about in ancient Egypt. It's what Pythagoras was talking about. If they were alive today, they'd be doing music to heal and connect people with their own spirituality." And the voice also said, "And your job is to share this with the world." Well, I come out of meditation. My conscious mind says, "I don't know what just happened. What am I supposed to do with this?" So I just kind of filed it away. I walked back down the road to meet the staff, and I go to the wrong building. There's nobody there, but there's a piano. And in a trance, I sit down at the piano and start playing the music that sounds like what I just heard. And I'm so deep into the zone that I don't hear the 10 people on staff walk into the workshop room. They go into yoga postures and lie on the floor and sitting in meditation. And finally, somebody coughs and says, "Who is this guy? Where'd you learn to play like that?" Well, make a long story short, I get hired, and it's still, what do I do with this? This is not, where my path is, but where every weekend leaders of the human potential movement teach at Esalen and Bridge Mountain Foundation.
Hmm.
And some in the first 6 weeks, Dr. John Lilly is there, Dr. Stanley Krippner is there, and they say when they hear the music, very nice, we see people having subjective meditation experiences, but if you want to be taken seriously, you need to do biofeedback research. And I said, "I just dropped out of grad school. You'll never catch me back in graduate school."
Right.
And then, famous last words, right? And Dr. Kripke
Right.
says, "Well, you need to do biofeedback research." So I'm getting the message now from two leading scientists. And I've just become the director of the Humanistic Psychology Institute at Sonoma State College. And we have the best biofeedback equipment in Northern California. If you become a grad student, you could use our equipment for free. So the door was opened,
Yeah.
and I went through that, but it's still, so I did the research. The research was very dramatic. The music that I was composing was so much more effective at creating a balanced, healing, meditative state in the deep alpha and theta range than the most relaxing classical music that one of the research associates said, this is no longer just your research project, this is your life. And I'm going, well, thank you very much. I have no money. I know nothing about business. Hello. I'm a musician. What am I supposed to do with this? So I didn't do anything with it for, a couple of years until at a Christmas party in 1974, I'm sitting in with the band and playing trumpet. And someone comes up to me after my solo and says, "You're pretty good." I say, "Thank you." He says, "How come you do you have an album?" I go, "No, there's no place to record." And he says, "I'm opening the first independent multi-track studio in the San Francisco Bay Area." And I said, "I will be your first client." And I was,
Yeah.
and that's when my life changed. That first day in the studio, January 4th, 1975, I was home. It was like a temple of sound, and I recorded my first album that weekend, very quickly learning that recording is the easy part. Learning how to do an album cover, learning how to uh, distribute it, to market it. I knew nothing about that. So I had hired different people, all of whom said they knew what they were doing, and basically none of them did. But that was when my life really started understanding that people wanted music like this. I was making music like this. I had to learn the mechanics of the business world, which were anathema to me as a student of the 60s, where all business was evil.
Yeah.
In the 60s and 70s, though, we started to have the new paradigm of business with heart, conscious business, bringing consciousness and spirituality into business. So excuse me, that was the introduction, but it was a slow slog. It was
Yeah.
starting very, very slowly. Early ripoffs almost put me out of business. In fact, from the leading
But
yoga distribution company in San Francisco, Rainbow Bridge Distribution Company, uh, purposely uh, placed an order for an entire pressing of 1,000 LPs, and then went out of business, owing me all that money, and almost put me out of business before I even really got in business.
yeah, but
So
you kept pushing forward. I mean, as I said before, I mean, in listening to you, the doors opened, or the doors, the portals appeared, and you walked through. And look, I say to people I do life coaching with, I mean, the hurdles will always present themselves. And the question is how do we face them? How do we overcome them? And when I listen to you, it's just these opportunities kept presenting themselves, and you kept, to me, listening, fearlessly going forward, pursuing your passion.
that is certainly part of it. What was also true is that this was the era now in 75 when some of the first of the mind body uh,
Spirit.
weekend conferences started happening, which were talking about all the things that I was interested in: meditation and healing and brain waves and etc. and chakras. And there was the first major conference at the UC Santa Cruz in September, and I really wanted to go there, but I didn't have the $150 to buy a ticket. So I called them up and I said, "Who's your music director?" And they said, "What do you mean? We don't have a music director. Why do we need one?" And just improvising, they said, "Well, someone needs to play music between the speakers to get them more receptive, to give them a little relaxation." And I talked myself into the gig. And
Wow.
at that event is where I met major leaders in the field, including Dr. Virginia Satir, and started getting the feedback that what I was doing was really relevant. I did a live color and sound version of the Chakra Suite where I would show the colors, play the music and the keynotes. People had experiences they had never had. And I started getting feedback. An old man came up to me after my performance and said, "I could feel my right foot." And I'm going, "So what?" And in my head, he says, "I have, because of an injury, I haven't felt anything below my knee in 20 years."
Wow.
So something about
Yeah.
the music and the context created a healing experience. And I'm realizing that this is not just a series of pretty notes and beautiful music. There's higher level healing going on that some of the other scientists I was connecting with and the psychics and the mediums would then tell me what they see going on. And that was part of how I learned what the energies are that I'm dealing with that were uh, similar to some other musicians, but different than most other musicians. And certainly the intention and the focus was different. As a trumpet player, it was about ego. It was about, look how good I am. I could play all these notes and I could hit these notes that are so high, hardly any other trumpet players could do that. When I'm playing the meditation music, it's not about me. It's about the effect, having the energy of the music come through and have the positive effect on people. And
Good.
at that event, other people who said, we'd like to do conferences in our city. So suddenly I'm getting invitations to LA, lots in LA, but Chicago, in New York. And that's where I started coming in front of many other audiences. And then I'd call up local media people. Back in those days, you could do that and say, I'm coming to town. I have the first album for meditation and healing that's on the market. I'd like to get interviewed. And I talked my way into interviews. Even when I
Right.
was in LA, a guest dropped out at the last minute of the Tom Snyder show, the late night with
Yes,
Tom
I
Snyder.
know it. Yeah.
And I had a part time little agent, and he calls me up and says, "You want to be on Tom Snyder tonight?" I go,
Sure.
"Sure." I didn't know
Yeah.
any better.
Yeah.
But I'm in LA with my station
Awesome.
wagon, with my electric piano in the back because I'm at a conference. So I show up at NBC Studios in Burbank and had a fantastic interview. And I was so green, so naive. I'm talking over him. I watched that now. I said, it's amazing he didn't kick me out of the studio because I interrupted him several times. But he said, this is fascinating. Let's have you back on and we'll zone out the entire country. And that was the first time the country had ever seen on mass media someone play and talk about chakras. So that really started opening up the field, and from that, I would get other invitations. And I was
Sure.
pretty much on the road every weekend except major holidays for the next 10 years. That's how I launched my career, being my own agent, manager. I never had basically an ongoing management situation. I didn't have an agent. So
Let
part
me
of
say,
that
I
was,
think I would say you launch your career through courage and bravery and inner strength. I mean, again, I
yes,
mean, taking these steps. I mean, so many people, are fearful of taking these steps or are fearful of heading into the unknown. I mean, I've had a teacher recently who keeps pushing me to do things that I feel a little uncomfortable or a little unsure about. And, I mean, and like doing these podcasts, which is new for me. And, I think that when our audience hears this, I wanted to inspire them to go ahead and really take that next step,
yes,
face the fear and move forward.
right.
Um,
Absolutely. That's such a good point. About a year and a half ago, I got an email from a hip hop DJ who has a podcast. He's also most also into old vinyl LPs, and he
uh-huh.
calls up and says, "Do you know that your very first album, even before Spectrum Suite, before I had to change the name, it was called Christening for Listening, is the holy grail of vinyl LP collectors, and that hip hop artists around the world have sampled it?" I go, no, no
Uh,
one, asked me, for permission. I didn't get any royalties for it. I had no idea. So we're talking and interviewing. But then he says, so with all this stuff going on, why didn't you give up? And no one had ever asked me that. And I never really thought about that. I go,
no,
you know, I got this inner drive, this inner push, or this inner calling, but I also, at that point, really understood that that was my mission. But by that time, I had gotten past life readings and other things that said, this is your mission in this lifetime. So when you're told that, that's kind of the overview. So the individual frustrations and blockages, it just kept me going.
Yeah.
But that is uh, what kept me going, because I really had nothing else to really fall back on, and nothing else that I basically
You
wanted
loved
to
it.
do,
Yeah.
and that was it. But
You
the
know,
other thing I wanted to before I lose the train of thought
yeah.
is that I also started learning that the music that I play and that I'm known for and that I record, I learned early on that at least some of it, is a co-composing situation. In other words, I started getting help from the other side. There were times that my fingers would move, that I would play music that I had never played before. And that's how I know it wasn't a left brain, my own ego, technical virtuosity, that there were things that were out of the blue. And I learned, without going into names, that yes, I have a band, but most people can't see them. That I was getting help from, and
Mhm.
over the years, without mentioning names, there were there were some classical composers. There are other higher dimensional beings, and my early consultant said, "Don't talk about that publicly. Uh,
Sure, sure.
they'll just make fun of you." And they said, "Let the music speak for itself," which I did. But now that I'm working on, writing my memoir, I see connections that even I didn't see at the time, where spirit was coming through. And so I always, and in fact, some of the liner notes, you'll see me acknowledge my band of angels, Pythagoras, and a number of the composers and beings that have assisted me over the years. And some of them, some of the situations made it into their books, but never into mine. So it was a very small, limited audience that knows that the mystical connections that have inspired my own music and career over the years. But at a certain age, you go, okay, I could talk about this now. And
It's
after
beautiful.
1994, when Doreen Virtue and Hay House and James Van Prague started writing books about angels and their direct communication with angels, that was when I released my album Gifts of the Angels, which was an anthology of music that I had been playing for the 20 years before that, but couldn't say what the connection was because it was too far out. Suddenly it was okay to speak about that, up to a point, and that's when I started coming out of the closet as a musician
Yeah.
who's working with additional higher dimensional energies and
Amazing.
creativity.
Really great. I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit, about a little more of the technical aspect of, sound and healing and how they connect. And I know at the very beginning when you were talking about alpha waves and beta waves, and I think our audience would be interested in hearing, from your perspective, how sound can help to heal.
Yes. Well, several ways. Uh, with There are many different forms of healing. I have focused on the more ambient, the non-rhythmic, the uh, gentle side. There's healing that happens with major drums and major rhythm and the shamanic use of sound and rhythm. I focused on texture, but what I learned is that by working with music that doesn't have a beat, and if you listen to my first albums or the music I've been doing on Deep Alpha or lately, the new albums of psychedelic therapy music, the music doesn't have a huge beat. It's more ambient. That, number one, allows your own breathing to slow down. When you slow down your breathing, when it's not being manipulated and entrained by the drum beat and the pulse of the music, your body shifts into a natural state of balance where the hemispheres of your brain begin to balance, where your breathing sets up a standing wave between your heart and your brain that sets up an associated electromagnetic field around your head that interfaces and entrains to the dominant electromagnetic field of the earth, known as the Schumann resonance. And that's one of the reasons why getting into a deeply relaxed state is so healing. So the music is a part of that. When we work with the chakras, which again was the first album I came out with, when you tune the chakras, that also allows your body to operate at a higher energetic frequency. And all these things, when you don't have a musical stimulus that rips off or manipulates or forces you to pay attention to the music, it's very different than if you're allowed to just go with the tone. For instance, if I sing this little phrase right now, watch what happens in your body, in your chest, with your breathing, and in your mind. So I'll sing the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And if I don't finish, you could probably hear that note in your head. You know
Yeah.
what's supposed to be there. We've been
Yep.
so culturally conditioned to anticipate where music is going. We are always in the future. We're not in the here. That's
Interesting.
HEAR and now. And
Mhm.
that is one of the major discoveries that I made. And in that state uh, is where we tap into the state of mindfulness, of mindful awareness of the present moment. When I'm recording, I never am thinking a minute ahead or what I'm going to play in the next 20 seconds. I am totally in the space between the notes, in the gap between thoughts, with Deepak Chopra was popularizing some years ago. Well,
Mhm.
I've always been there. And that's what I was talking about in terms of the space between the notes, the gap between thoughts. And that's where I naturally went, and that's where I naturally go when I'm composing in the studio or playing. And that state, also because it's a state related vibration, gets recorded onto the music. Music becomes then a carrier wave of higher consciousness, and those are some of the factors that make music like mine so healing. Also, the instruments that I use. I introduced the Fender Rhodes electric piano to the basically to the new age world and the meditation world. It had been used in some jazz and some funk music before that, but when it's just on its own, when I first heard the instrument in person, I sold my second guitar, my second trumpet, and for me, it was a non-drug, sound-assisted way to get into an altered states of consciousness. I sit at the keyboard and I start playing, and I would instantly go into an altered state because I was getting to a deep alpha state because of the stereo vibrato and phase shifting that the instrument had built into it. So
What do
that
you
is
mean? What do you mean by a deep alpha state?
right. Okay. So when we're talking right now, our brains are pulsating. Our brains are electrical organisms, and scientists have measured the electrical pulsations of the brain at different states. We're speaking now. We're in the beta range of 13 to 39 cycles per second. They've measured this with the scientific equipment. Alpha is between 8 and 12 cycles per second. And again, some of the people on the internet say, well, it's 7 or it's 13, but most of the people, it's 8 to 12.
Hmm.
And that's a meditative state, light meditation, relaxed alertness. It's where healing begins to happen, it's where you feel at one with the world. And part of that is because we are attuning to the dominant vibration of the planet, which is
I
a
see.
harmonic of 8 cycles per second. So 8 cycles in our brain is not coincident with the dominant frequency of our planet. When you go slower and deeper into meditation, you're dealing with the theta state, which is 4 to 7 cycles per second. And I started doing research on my own, asking the question, well, what is the difference between those? Can I feel the difference? Are my meditations different if I'm locked into one state? And so I found out how to musically and electronically lock myself into that state with binaural beats. And I found that there were some frequencies where creativity and the music would just fill my head. Other times I'm playing notes, and sometimes I could get into the state where I'm hearing the music and playing it, and it's like just an automatic flow. And delta is between 1 and 3 cycles per second. And
Wow.
some of the places on the internet, you'll see they say, well, delta is 1 to 4, and even at the expos, you have people speaking, and theta is 4 to 7. And I'd raise my hand and said, "Excuse me, how could 4 cycles per second, 4 hertz, hertz, be both delta and theta? You don't know what you're talking about." And then I get asked to leave the room, or people would applaud. But that's part of my New York coming out. I go,
Yeah.
there can't be two frequencies. And the difference is at four, for me, what I experienced when I was working in my Deep Theta album, when I finished, I was floating and could barely walk. When I finished my Sleep album at 3 cycles per second, at the end of the studio session, I got in my car and drove right off the road.
Wow.
So that's how
Scary.
different three
Yeah.
and four could be.
Yeah.
So you never want to, drive in a delta state. But
No, so,
you know, it,
I actually have two questions that come up from your
all right.
conversation. The first really is, I think most people think of meditation as being in a place of silence. And you speak a lot of meditation, and it goes with sound. So what is your feeling about the relationship between meditation and sound versus meditation and silence?
Okay, for me, sound gets me to the silence. And I've experienced, ever since I've got into my first recording studio session, the deepest silence inside recording studios. But then when I meditate at home, I'll listen to a couple minutes of my deep theta and then turn it off and go into the silence. Being a type A, we used to call high energy people type A individuals, and then now we have adult ADHD or certain places on the spectrum. Like many people, trying to meditate in silence is getting into that monkey mind. We have thoughts all the time. It's so hard to get into the silence. But
Yes,
using music as something to quiet the chattering mind, but not so busy that it makes you pay attention to the music. It's a very fine line.
I
Most of
understand.
my most of my competitors or other people in the field haven't mastered the art of getting out of the way. They're still, hey, listen to me, listen to this phrase. And long time ago, I made the decision after getting some bad reviews. Do I want to record for the reviewers and the critics to make them happy? Or do I want to make my audience happy? And when I started getting feedback with them saying, we want more of this music, not this jazz music that you were used to playing. And that's why people don't know about my trumpet. They don't know about my guitar. This year, coming out with an anthology of some of my uh, jazz tracks on trumpet and guitar that I did 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I had to kind of keep them hidden because people would see one of those, they buy it and say, this isn't meditation music. And even Deja Blues, which was another uh, bit of channeled music and a chapter in my book, uh, it said this is not quiet ambient meditation music. People never read the description. They see my name and said, "Oh, it's got to be mellow," and they hear this trancy drum and these other sounds. They go, "This is not meditation music," and would send it back. But yet other people said, "This is the best thing he ever did," and that's how I got on the charts of Billboard charts, and it was a bestseller at Tower Records. So there was a market for that. The problem was when the new age stores like yours, in the old days when you had a little music session, they say, well, now we have, there's 30 artists who are making albums. We only have room for 3 or 4 of your albums, Stephen. Do you want to put albums that we know are bestsellers, or you want to bring this new, more rhythmic one in that may not sell? We don't want to take it. We don't want to take a chance. So that's why I wasn't even able
Interesting.
to promote or sell albums that were of a different energetic. But
Hmm.
basically, to answer your question, sound is a portal, and sound and music that isn't so busy. And
Yeah.
again, I come from a busy background. As a trumpet player and a guitar player, I was like Mr. Fast Fingers. I could play more notes. You know, in New York, the faster you could play, the more notes you played, the better you were considered. So it was a major ego reduction to suddenly be playing slow music and people saying, "Oh man, he used to be good. He could play, 100 notes, in three measures." Uh, but it was a whole different reason for playing. It was to create an experience and to help people connect to their own spirituality. And over the years, as I studied direct response marketing and would put little postcards in my albums and cassettes and CDs, I got feedback from people who are truck drivers, who are lawyers, who are uh, doctors, who are psychologists, who are psychics, who are lots of massage therapists, and they all said the same thing. Basically, I have never felt like this before. Your music helped me sleep. Your music quiets my screaming kids when they're going to sleep. I get more relaxed listening to your music than anything I've ever heard before. Well, when you hear that starting in 1975, uh, I had no choice but to continue because it's obviously striking a chord, it's resonating, even though at that point the music industry had no interest in putting out an album that didn't have words, that didn't have a big beat, that didn't have the usual chord structure. I would try describing it as neo impressionistic classical music. And they said, we don't know what that means. And you're not Ravel, you're not Debussy, who are some of my ideological patron saints. So we're not going to put you in the classical section because you're not a dead white European. And there was no place to even sell music like I was doing. So I learned about direct mail and would work with people and ultimately studied that. And that's how I also learned about the music from the feedback I got from people. So that is uh, how I learned to communicate the benefits of the music that people could feel in their own life within seconds. You could feel your heartbeat slow down. You could feel the tension in your body melt away. And people said, we never felt that with any other music. And I said, that's right, because all the other music, and I use the word scaleless interrupters on my website and my YouTube channel to demonstrate that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, pause, how most music has stress built into it. The classical composition mantra is build tension and then release it. And I'm going as a New Yorker, going, I don't have 20 minutes to get relaxed. What do you have that'll get me there in a minute? And
Yeah.
I remember being kicked out of the meetings with the music therapy people and the classical departments at universities saying that's not music, or we can't allow people like you in here. And I'd show them the biofeedback research I did, and basically then it was the public telling other people we want music like that, and people just saying I don't care what my doctor says, I'm bringing this in as my own lifestyle prescription for sound health.
So let me say, I mean, it's hard to believe, Stephen, but we're almost through our hour. And
I know, I
so,
just looked right.
right. And so, when you talk about people wanting your music, I'd like for you to let everybody know how they can get a hold of your music these days.
Great, thank you. Well, there's two ways. One, Amazon. If you're an old school guy like me, and you like CDs and you like to listen to a whole album that's sequenced for a particular effect, Amazon, my website, stephenhalpernmusic.com, great places to go. Many stores no longer carry any CDs, as you well know. But the big revolution that really kicked in a couple of years ago, it was now probably 2019, when I was almost in bankruptcy, when our major distributor went out of business, stealing 10,000 CDs and not paying royalties for 6 months. Streaming music, you could hear my music pretty much everywhere now on the major streaming sites like Pandora and Spotify and uh, of course, Amazon. So you could just click in my name, and you'll be able to hear individual tracks, entire albums. I make videos since the pandemic. The studio that I used to work in person in every Friday moved up to Oregon, so I haven't been there, but I'm able to work on Zoom, sometimes with new music, but also to edit. And now, part of the big way that I let people know about new music and even old music, including Deja Blues. The video will be published very soon when I re-release the 40th anniversary of that album. uh, that I will feature a video, at least one of my own videos, for a major track on every album. YouTube will often put up a picture of the album and play the entire album through, which is, you
What
know,
what is your YouTube channel?
it's youtube.com/Stephen Halpern Music.
Great.
And that really makes it easy for people to find out. For years, YouTube was a major competitor, and I used to, you know, argue with them and said, "How could you guys put up my music for free and not pay me anything?" He says, "Well, that's new reality." Well, the music industry finally got them to pay some royalties. We get royalties; it's very little, but when you have millions of people, and this is the other thing I want to end with, Jeff. When you have millions of people listening, those thousands of a pennies add up. And number two, what I noticed is, since I don't listen to Spotify or Pandora most of the time because most of the music is distracting for me if I'm working, I could only listen to my own music or nothing when I'm creatively writing or working on my memoir. But when I heard Keynote C, first chakra of Chakra Suite, which I recognize immediately. I'm on the table in my chiropractor's office. She had gone out of the room, and I noticed such an amazing shift I could feel in my head, in the electromagnetic fields around my head. I realized that at that same moment, hundreds of thousands of people are tuned into Spotify and and Pandora, hearing the same music at the same time, and we were all having our brains shift into a high coherence, balanced brainwave state of 8 cycles per second, and we are all becoming a linked in non-local consciousness, and that's where the latest and the greatest benefit of healing music is being manifested. We are radiating positive healing vibrations out onto the planet, and as people are saying, what we feed the field, the electromagnetic energy field of the planet, matters. So as we do our own meditation, we contribute to the meditation and the healing of the planet as we link on, even if we're not linking directly, we are linking etherically and in consciousness. And that's something now we can talk about. That builds on the work of Rupert Sheldrake, the great scientist, and the concept of morphic resonance. I call this auditory morphic resonance and sound assisted morphic resonance, where we actually create a standing wave in the energy fields of the planet. And that's the
That's amazing.
manifestation. That's
Yeah.
the manifestation
Yes.
of what I was told in the Redwoods that day in 1969 in November, when I had no idea how that could possibly ever come to pass. But that was before the internet. That was before
Well, yeah.
simultaneous ways, and that's what keeps me
Thank-
going on.
Well, thank you for bringing us full circle. That's just an amazing way to conclude. And Stephen, again, I just want to thank you for sharing your amazing story, your amazing mystic journey, and your wisdom about sound and healing and meditation, and really from the depths of my soul. Thank you. I
Well,
appreciate it
Jeff,
very, very much.
thank you. I enjoyed it, and hopefully, and if people have questions, they could write me in care of my website, info@innerpeacemusic.com, or they could tweet at Stephen Halpern. I have a Facebook fan page where people can send some notes. But the important thing
Perfect.
is, Take some time, honor yourself, give us, even if it's only 5 minutes, take 5 minutes to slow down and tune in. And speaking as an adult on the scale of functional ADHD, we need that. It is very healing just to give yourself. It's what I call it, what John Bradshaw called it, music of being, not music of doing. This is time that your soul needs, and you'll be better off for doing so.
Well, thank you, Stephen, again, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'm grateful for you as well. And until next time, stay positive, see the beauty in all things, and keep your mind focused on creating exactly what you want. Thank you for joining us today on the Mystic Journey podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and look forward to having you back again for our next podcast. If you have any questions about what you heard on the podcast today, or would like to share your thoughts on the podcast in general, please feel free to email me at jeff@mysticjourneyla.com. Until next time, stay positive, see the beauty in all things, and keep your mind focused on creating exactly what you want in your life.